Hello and welcome to Infinity. I'm Charlie Seraphin. For the next half hour, we're going to be talking about language, hypnosis, and a whole lot more with Yvonne Ginsberg, a certified master practitioner of neurolinguistics and Ericksonian hypnosis. She has a private practice and has taught at the University of California at San Francisco, the University of California at Davis, and at Princeton University. She's done workshops throughout the world. She has conducted research in schizophrenia with the National Institute of Mental Health. Neurolinguistics, what is it?
Essentially what it is a newly formulated study. It's arisen over the past 12 years, and it's a combination of the study of language, both the language that you hear when people speak and the underlying structures of language. In other words, all the little bits and pieces that float underneath the sentence that make up the semantic impact of the sentence, that give the sentence meaning, significance. How those structures interrelate with each other and how they organize your thinking as well as most of your behavioral patterns to construct a whole meaning for how you experience reality, what makes up your conscious and unconscious experience.
So it's not what you say, it's how you say it?
Both.
Okay. When we use language to express our thoughts and feelings, how does that language which we use affect those thoughts and feelings? It does affect them.
That's right. That's right. That's something that actually people hold as a belief, but at a very, very subconscious level. When you communicate with somebody, both behaviorally and linguistically, you are really directly affecting their states of experience immediately at that moment. You can understand that when you realize that tonality affects people's internal experience. If I use a tonality that's soft and quiet and gentle, it's going to create different states in a person than if I shout and am abrasive. Now this also goes with the kinds of words that you use and the kinds of structure of words that you use. If you use imperative structures, then you will create in a person the experience that there's something that they should do, that they must do, that they have to do. Their backs will sit up straight, or they will become defensive or aggressive. In other words, language literally creates the experience, not only in yourself, but in the people that are listening to you, in terms of internal states, in terms of their sense of well-being, in terms of their sense of being curious, in terms of their sense of being, say, meditative or motivated or decisive or loving.
What are some other examples of when you talk about tonality? You mentioned speaking softly, and that can help me be relaxed and, to use the popular jargon, mellow out, or you can get me agitated. What are some other examples of a specific thing that we might do with language that would affect both the speaker and the receiver of that communication?
There's lots and lots and lots. One of them, which is most useful and most interesting, is understanding the way that the questions that we ask each other, this is relevant to this context, the questions that we ask each other literally direct a person's awareness in a certain area. If I ask you, how did you get up this morning, then that leaves you in a pretty open frame. If I say, did you get up on the wrong side of bed this morning, then I am already implying, and I'm going to create an experience inside of you that something is wrong. If I go into an interview situation and say, now how is it that you came to be this kind of a human being, then I'm implying that the person has to explain themselves and that I have some kind of a judgment about the kind of human being they are. In other words, there's lots of implications and presuppositions that are embedded in the language that consciously you might not be aware of, but that unconsciously create moods and states and expectations. If you go into a courtroom, then of course the whole mood of the courtroom already has presuppositions in it. And when somebody comes up and starts questioning you, you will notice that there's many presuppositions underlying the actual sentences that include understanding about what the person did, what the person's motivation was, and the person really has to kind of come up from under it and say, no, that's not true, or yes, that is true. And it sets up what we call a presuppositional environment. And every aspect of a human being is sensitive to that. If people understand this, their communication is going to be active rather than passive, in the sense that if you want to create a romantic mood in somebody, then you go with that presupposition. You don't ask them, do you love me? Or how do you feel about me? You go with the presuppositions that it is true. You kind of elicit those states from the person rather than question the person and try to pummel them into having a certain experience.
Is there an advantage for a person who has what we commonly refer to as language skills, the ability to speak and or understand more than one language? Does that broaden your frame of reference?
It can broaden your frame of reference. There are some languages that belong to similar groups, like the Indo-European language groups. There are some languages that belong to their unique group, like Hungarian or Finnish. There are some languages that belong to an Asiatic group, like Chinese, which is not Indo-European. They have both structurally and presuppositionally different realms of experience that they evoke. If you have usage in a series of these languages, then you can probably assume that there's going to be different maps in your consciousness that have been evoked and elicited, and that you can use them and apply them wherever it's appropriate, and you have a broader range of conceptual flexibility. You can put it that way. You also have a broader range of understanding other individuals and what their experience might be like on the basis of listening to how they express themselves.
How would that work? Let's say that my native language was Italian, but I speak English now in our conversation. But the institutional framework is still there within me to think in Italian, to dream in Italian, to speak in Italian whenever I have the opportunity. Would I, in a conversation in a language other than Italian, in English, draw upon those experiences and that frame of reference that you talked about? Or do you only operate in one language at a time?
No, you can operate at many, many levels in relation to language, in relation to everything. That is the significance of understanding, of having the hypothetical construct of a conscious, an unconscious, a subconscious, the aware states, the not so aware states, the deep states. In other words, we're all walking around already presupposing that there are many, many, many levels that we can hold instantaneously at the same time. When you use a specific comparison of English and Italian, I would say that Italian differs from English more than in just the actual dictionary words that you're using, in the tonality and in the speed of the language, in the intonation patterns of the language. The expression of emotion in Italian is much more immediate, is much more directly receivable because of the intonation patterns of the language than, let's say, in English, where there's much more reliance on the dictionary significance of words, let's say, than in the intonations and excitability patterns that are carried just auditorily in the language itself.
Are there archetypal languages? Are there certain basic languages, Sanskrit, Hebrew, that have sounds that have universal application or intonations that...
Yeah. Language all have something in common. That is that they exist in sound when you talk. And originally they weren't written, they were spoken, right? So they have vibrational implications, that's for sure. Languages that were part of the oral tradition, like Sanskrit, a friend of mine would say in the Tibetan tradition there are certain languages which are mantrically expressed, which are the vibrations of the dakinis, or which are the vibration of certain Vajra energies. In other words, you don't really have to know the significance of individual words. What you really need to do is to just chant them with yourself, to chant them in group, to chant them towards another person, and you are creating a vibrational wavelength that has impact on the person's experience at a conscious level, at a spiritual level, at an emotional level, whatever level you want to focus on or you want to ascribe to the person's experience.
What role does an individual's voice have in that communicative process?
Like yourself, working in radio, you appreciate the fact that when different people get on the radio and use certain tonalities or have certain levels of voice range, that they are more interesting to listen to, or that they create more excitement, or that they elicit curiosity, or that they create the desire to listen longer, to know more. Voice range is very, very important, especially for people who incline to be auditory types. Now, NLP is famous for having divided people into three simple categories: visual, auditory, kinesthetic, and of course gustatory and olfactory, which is a little down the road of conscious states. For people who are auditory types, who do a lot of listening, who talk a lot inside themselves, who sway their bodies from side to side, and who have a certain gesture in terms of they often look like they're talking on the telephone just when they're having a conversation, things like that. These people are especially prone to be affected by the sound of people's voice, by the sound that's going on all around them, by the type of music or the type of auditory environment that they live in has a deep, deep effect on their states. But in general, it affects everybody. When you're walking down the street and somebody has got a jackhammer, it affects how you feel, it affects how you breathe, it affects how you digest. If you have a person who's a very close and dear friend, or a person that you live with, you'll notice that your choice has got a lot to do with how you feel when they're talking. And if it does, you like their talking, then you'll want them to be and talk more. There's some people who, after a while in their relationship, stop talking to each other at all. It's likely that it's because they don't really get along with the tonality patterns of the voices, as well as anything else.
What does this have to do with hypnosis?
Well, hypnosis, and we've been talking about conscious and unconscious states. These are all like ascriptions. They're like theoretical ascriptions. Okay. In hypnosis, you have the presupposition that there are many, many levels of experience that are not immediately available to the person's conscious awareness, and that those levels of experience are very important to creating their reality. In hypnosis, what you do is invoke the conscious aspects of their experience to go to the background, and the unconscious aspects of experience to come to the foreground. You address those. You have the presupposition that they exist. First of all, you use a lot of tonality and voice and language patterns to invoke those experiences to come to the foreground, and then you address them. You question them, you address what their outcomes are, what their issues are in the person's experience. You apply certain poetic, metaphoric language in order to put the person into a so-called altered state. You can use time reorientation patterns to allow the person's identity to loosen up and to wave into other dimensions so that other things can be evoked than what they're usually eliciting in their own experience. You can apply confusion techniques using language, confusing time frames, confusing reality frames, confusing location frames, using sentences that invoke contradictions that the person isn't usually going to hear or understand, so that you really allow another part of the person's experience to have the stage for a while, and invite that part of the person's experience to become creative, to learn, and to have an impact on the whole being.
Is there a light exercise that you might try without endangering anyone who's listening to the radio right now? Someone is sitting alone quietly listening to the radio, enjoying your voice and the impact that it has on them, and their mind is following your train of thought and perhaps wandering a little bit too and embellishing the concepts that you're putting forward. Is there something that you might do that would help them reach an altered state of consciousness?
At this very moment, you've already done it very well. You've just created a very good induction yourself. Congratulations. That's exactly what it is. It's a little bit like taking a train of thought, taking an experience, whatever part of the body they would focus on or listen to or feel, and allowing your breathing to start pacing, a very natural state of listening awareness that allows you to get in touch with experiences from your past, experiences that meant a lot to you, experiences that are organized now for the first time in a new pattern of perception, as well as a deep, deep feeling of relaxation, because it's nice to relax when you're listening, isn't it?
Yes. Are there any people whose conscious and subconscious dimensions are totally in sync, so that if you were to get them into an altered state of consciousness under hypnosis or whatever technique, that the responses that you would get to the kinds of questions and that their thought processes would be the same as if they were totally aware and awake?
I haven't experienced personally people like that. I know that some of the outcomes that are described in deep, profound spiritual practices, which include intensive meditation practice, are designed to lead a person to such a form of clarity that there is a unification of all the so-called levels of personal experience that somehow comes to a joining point with universal reality, and at that level there is what we would call absolute unification. And when they are in that state of perception and being, then you couldn't even ascribe a personal consciousness to them, much less have that consciousness variegated into those different levels.
But most people are a little different on various levels.
Yes.
And
yes.
This is all
sometimes unrecognizably so. If you tape their session and they are in a deep trance state, and you allow some part of themselves to come up that has been affecting their behavior but hasn't consciously been communicating with them, and give them the opportunity to use this particular time to come out and communicate, people will listen to the recording afterwards and be completely amazed at not only what this part of themselves said and what the historical experience that this part is sharing is, but even the tone of voice. I mean, it will be a completely unrecognized tone of voice. I mean, register a completely different realm of tonality.
In some cultures, it's very common to accept that duality or multiplicity of personality, and people go into altered states of consciousness and then act upon certain things. Let's simplify it and say in a tribal tradition, and certain members of the tribe are more than one person, and everyone's aware of that, and sometimes they're the shaman or the medicine man, and other times they're just another one of the people in the tribe. In Western cultures, oftentimes when the gap is wide between what we know in the conscious level and the subconscious, then we ascribe an illness or a disease to those people. We say they have a mental illness because they're unbalanced. What about that?
You've pretty much said it, haven't you? It's true. We're a monistic culture. Freud said it in a book called Moses and Monotheism. Basically, the Judeo-Christian tradition as a whole has introduced the idea of one God, has introduced the idea of one person, has introduced the idea of singular egoic functions that we can identify as you or as me. Different people ascribe different intentions to that kind of a format. Some people say it's easier to control people, it's easier to predict them, it's more economic in terms of social interaction. The fact of the matter is that in primitive cultures or in shamanic rituals or in rituals of any kind, when you use the very word ritual itself, it feels like you're evoking old-time traditions, old-time cultures, and what you're evoking is the idea of breaking up, of busting up that monadic idea. Some people break up, bust up that monadic idea in their own experience without any intention to do so, and experience a lot of confusion, panic, and when they get taken into the psychiatric hallways with it, they are ascribed as ill. And the treatment is to bring together all those little shredded pieces of themselves into one focus again, or into one being again. But there are, as you said, cultures where that kind of multiplicity of being within each individual, as well as multiplicity of deities and multiplicity of realities, whatever level you're going to look at it from is really seen as a resource, as an empowerment function, rather than as a confusion function. And instead of confusing the social situation, is seen as enriching it, is seen as giving individuals within a social structure access to many, many, many levels of spiritual awareness that is useful, that is functional, and that is appropriate.
Do you try to do that in any examples? Have you, in your practice, worked with people who have an impression of themselves as being unbalanced? The friends and neighbors and relatives don't really understand them. They've got a problem. They're not interacting very well. The traditional treatment would be to try to clean it all up so that they can present a unified front. Do you work with them in developing the multiplicity of their personality?
That's really very much what we were doing when we were doing research with the National Institute of Mental Health. Mind you, it was 12 years ago when some friends of mine were working with those ideas. One of them was a man named Ronnie Lang. You might remember him. And a man who trained with him was at that time director of schizophrenia research at the National Institute of Mental Health. So people were friendly to those ideas. I have to say personally that I always work with developing the individual's flexibility. I'm not going to go with the presupposition that because I think multiplicity is enriching, that I'm going to enforce that criteria on a person that I'm working with. I will always go for flexibility so that they have the choice at any given moment of identifying with whatever reality is most useful to them given what they want to experience.
What's the difference between Ericksonian hypnosis and hypnosis as most of our listeners would be familiar with it?
Hypnosis has had a really interesting reality in our culture. It's been basically used to control people's behavior medically. Like if there's habits that people want to stop smoking, stop eating, these kinds of things, then hypnosis has been useful. It's also been used as a stage show. It's been entertaining for people to experience. Ericksonian hypnosis is the first real solid presentation of something that can genuinely help get people in touch with deeper and deeper and deeper levels of resources that their whole psychodynamic system has made available to them through the experience of their lifetime, which is really barred from operating simply because of the economics of what it is to be an individual and make it in this culture. It immediately puts them in touch with the fact that the so-called unconscious is very, very helpful, has been leading them in fortuitous routes since the very beginning of their life, if not before, has really been their ally in the most positive sense of the word, and has been instructing them and informing them, and is available for more conscious communication. Now, these kinds of presuppositions are not traditionally what hypnosis has been talking about. And if you want to, you can say that even though Milton Erickson was very much, he was really within the medical profession. He was a very American hypnotist who happened to be a doctor. There is some level in which he was an absolute master of being able to swing a person into full acceptance of the American traditional way of life, and at the same time elicit from that individual very, very, very far out tools and skills and very profound allies within their unconscious to allow them to have a use of many, many, many levels of reality to get what they want, even if what they want is just to have a family and a nice income and a bunch of kids out in Scottsdale, Arizona. That's okay. The outcome is not the thing that makes you enlightened or socially relevant or whatever. It's the facility and flexibilities of patterns that you have available for use and where you can draw them from, what the frames of reference are that you're willing to draw them from to get those outcomes. That's where you can stratify and open up frames of reference and really get out there.
When you get out there, you're really talking about just really reaching
in there.
You're getting out there by reaching inside.
Right. Right.
Is there overriding
One of
spiritual
the nice
philosophy?
things, one of the nicest things about hypnosis is that you can set up, again, I'm going to use the term, the presuppositional environment within the individual, that there's many, many levels of creation of your own experience that you really don't have your fingers on, that are really happening at a deep, deep unconscious level, but that are completely positive. So it elicits strategies of trust. It elicits strategies of deep relaxation, that everything is really going as it should. It elicits strategies of understanding that some of the behaviors that you want to change might not be really appropriate now, but they were really very, very appropriate somewhere in your life. And everything that is operating and functioning within you as an individual has had a positive function. If not now, it has had one in the past.
What about neuro-linguistic programming? Does it bridge these ideas about language and hypnosis?
Neurolinguistic programming is really like the skeletal, theoretical, structural description of why something like Ericksonian hypnosis has the impact that it has. It's an attempt to understand what the structures are that allow for inductions to be effective. And in that understanding, it gives people tools for changing individuals without necessarily altering their states or putting them in trance. Although it's hard to imagine anything changing without an altered state happening, because by definition, change takes, the top of the table of what you know to be true and makes some switches, some, reorganizations there. And in order for that to happen, your expectations have to go out beyond what your experience has been familiar with. And in order for that to happen, by definition, you have to generate some quality of altered state. Now, most people go around in altered states. When you're sitting in a room waiting for a phone to ring, or if you're sitting in the car waiting for the traffic light to turn from red to green, you are literally in a trance. If you get in touch with yourself at that moment, you will see that you're kind of daydreaming. There might be an internal hum. There's going to be a kind of stopping aspect to your experience, which, as you get more and more familiar with those states, is literally a trance state, is an altered state. In other words, we're forever in altered states. As you're looking at me and interviewing me and listening to what I say, you are in the altered state called listening. As you realize that I'm about to stop, all of your states are going to be registering and looking for things to say next, looking down. I mean, this is a continual process within the individual's conscious frame of reference, going from one altered state to the other. It's just that some states we're not as consciously familiar with as others. But you can be educated to have that conscious familiarity, and you can start using those states to support you, to give you energy, to give you relaxation, to give you curiosity, decisiveness, and motivation when it's necessary, when you choose.
This is Infinity. Remember to keep your mind open and listen to your heart. I'm Charlie Seraphin. Thank you for listening.